Mabel stood before the chipped bathroom mirror in her Seattle apartment, the hum of the city filtering through the cracked window. She traced her lips with a deep crimson shade, the kind her mother, Sofia, had once sneered at, calling it too bold for a proper girl. Her hazel eyes stared back, steady and unyielding, daring the reflection to crack under the weight of 12 years spent hiding. She'd built a life in the shadows, quiet, steady, successful, far from the Tacoma home that had spit her out like a bad taste. But last week, the past clawed its way back, sharp and uninvited. Began with a Facebook message from Lena, an old friend from high school she hadn't spoken to since graduation. "Wait, aren't you dead?" Mabel had laughed, a dry, hollow sound, assuming it was a morbid prank, until Lena sent a screenshot that stopped her cold. It was a family photo on Sofia's page. Her parents, Sofia and Matteo, beaming with forced pride behind her younger sister, Chiara, whose smile gleamed like polished glass. Below it, a comment stabbed at Mabel's chest. "We miss her every day." She'd be 34 this year. Her breath caught, her coffee mug trembling in her hand. They declared her dead, not estranged, not disowned, but dead. Not a metaphor, not a quiet cutting of ties, a literal, calculated erasure. She scrolled further, her fingers shaky on the mouse. A post from 3 years ago popped up. A church memorial slideshow, her braces-filled teenage photo framed by flickering candles, captioned, "Lost to a tragic accident." There'd been no accident, no crash, no twisted metal. She'd left at 18, exiled for daring to choose herself over their suffocating rules, and they'd buried her in a lie. Lena's follow-up message hit harder. "Your mom cried at the service," said rebellion took you. Everyone bought it. Mabel's laugh turned bitter, echoing off the bare walls of her kitchen, the sound jagged and raw. For 12 years she'd lived invisibly, first in Portland, then Seattle, scraping together a graphic design business, Ember Studio, from nothing but grit and late-night coffee. No family, no safety net, just her own stubborn will. She'd thought their silence was rejection, a cold shoulder she'd learned to shrug off. But this was a grave they dug and filled with fiction while she'd been out there, alive, building something real. Now she clipped on her silver hoop earrings, smoothed the fabric of her black dress, simple, sharp, a shadow with purpose, and stood taller, her reflection hardening into resolve. They were gathering tomorrow, Sofia and Matteo's 40th anniversary, a family celebration plastered across social media with nauseating cheer. Mabel smirked, the crimson lipstick a war paint she hadn't worn in years. The ghost they'd erased wasn't just coming home, she was coming to haunt them. She grabbed her keys, the jingle a quiet promise, and stepped into the dusk. They'd written her out of their story, but she'd rewrite the ending, and they wouldn't see it coming until she was standing in their light. Mabel's childhood home in Tacoma wasn't a haven of warmth. No Sunday casseroles bubbling in the oven, no bedtime stories whispered under a quilt. It was a place of sharp edges and colder silences, ruled by Sofia's iron hand and Matteo's ghostly absence. Love came with strings, a transactional game where approval was the prize, and Mabel always came up short. Sofia demanded discipline over affection, measuring worth in quiet obedience, two virtues Mabel never mastered. She was loud, curious, unafraid to question the rules etched into their lives like commandments. To Sofia, that made her a problem. To Matteo, a shadow he never bothered to see. Then there was Chiara, the golden child, 3 years younger and Sofia's mirror. Perfect grades, perfect curls, perfect lies spun with a smile. Mabel was her opposite. Messy hair, sharp tongue, a refusal to nod along when things felt wrong. Rebellious, Sofia called her, spitting the word like a curse. Ungrateful for daring to want a voice. Unlovable for being herself instead of the doll they'd wanted. By 16, Mabel learned silence wasn't just survival. It was their expectation, a cage she couldn't fit into no matter how hard she tried. At 16, she met Enzo, a boy from a world apart, Italian roots, warm family dinners, laughter that didn't demand repayment. He was kind, gentle, with a humor that softened her edges. He saw her, not the failure her family painted, and for the first time she felt alive, not invisible. When Sofia found out, she didn't scream. That would have been too human. She fixed Mabel with a stare colder than winter and said, "You're not one of us anymore." The ultimatum followed, family or Enzo. Mabel, voice trembling but firm, asked, "Can I choose myself?" That was the breaking point, the final betrayal in their eyes. On her 18th birthday, Sofia handed her a gift. A black trash bag stuffed with her clothes, a one-way bus ticket to Portland, and a door shut without a word. No hugs, no tears, just the click of the latch as Mateo stood by, silent as ever. Mabel sat on the curb, rain soaking her sneakers, clutching the bag as headlights blurred past. No one chased her, no one called. Not that night, not ever. She boarded the bus, the engines rumbled, drowning out the ache, and vowed never to beg for their scraps. Portland became her proving ground. She waitressed mornings, shelved books nights, slept on borrowed couches, surviving on instant noodles and a fire they couldn't snuff out. Their silence fueled her, each year a brick in the wall she built around herself. She enrolled in community college, then art school, graduating with honors, her cap a middle finger to their dismissal. Ember Studio grew from a freelance gig into a six-figure design business. Clients trusted her vision, born from a life rebuilt with no net. She'd thought she'd escape their shadow until Lena's message cracked the lie wide open. They hadn't just cut her off, they'd killed her off, turned her into a ghost story. Now she'd return, not as their cast-off, but as the woman they'd regret creating. Mabel's Seattle apartment hummed with quiet routine, coffee brewing on the counter, sketches of logos and layouts scattered across her desk, the faint patter of rain against the window. It was a Tuesday afternoon, ordinary until Lena's message shattered the calm like a stone through glass. Dead. She reread it, her hands frozen over her mug, the steam curling upward like a question mark. Lena's follow-up explained. Sofia had told everyone Mabel died in a car crash shortly after she left home, a story solidified at a church event years back. Photos arrived in her inbox. Sofia weeping crocodile tears, Mateo somber beside her, Chiara clutching a candle, all performing grief for a lie they'd crafted. Mabel's chest tightened, not with sadness but with a rage that burned low and steady. They'd erased her, turned her into a cautionary tale for their congregation. Rebellion kills. She'd been alive all along, working, building, thriving, while they played mourners over a fiction. She paced her apartment, the hardwood cool under her bare feet, replaying every moment of exile. She dug through her closet, pulling out a dusty box of keepsakes, old sketchbooks, a faded concert ticket, letters from Enzo, her first love, who'd moved away but left her with a belief in herself she'd clung to. She'd honored that belief, crafting a life they couldn't touch, a business that stood as proof of her survival. Now the anniversary loomed. Sofia and Mateo's 40th, a family celebration splashed across Facebook with nauseating cheer. "All family welcome," the post read, a hollow invite that excluded the daughter they'd buried. Mabel laughed, sharp and cold, the sound bouncing off her walls. She booked a flight to Tacoma, her fingers steady on the keyboard, and packed a manila folder, proof of her life. Her art school diploma, Ember Studios business license, photos of her first apartment, her first big client pitch. They'd buried her in words. She'd resurrect with evidence, tangible and undeniable. She stood by her window, the city skyline blurred by rain, and felt the ghost within her stir. Not the one they'd invented, but the one she'd become, silent, unseen, unstoppable. She'd spent 12 years invisible, not out of shame but survival, forging a path they'd never predicted. The folder sat on her desk, a quiet weapon, its contents a timeline of her defiance. She traced the crimson lipstick across her lips again, a ritual of reclaiming, and zipped her suitcase. They'd written her death scene. Now she'd crashed their stage, alive and unapologetic, a reckoning they'd never see coming until she was standing in their midst, breathing fire into their lies. The flight to Tacoma was short, the plane's hum a steady backdrop to Mabel's racing thoughts. She landed under a too bright sky, the kind that mocked the storm brewing inside her. She rented a car, a sleek black sedan, a far cry from the rattling bus that had carried her away 12 years ago, and drove to the old neighborhood, the streets unchanged, lined with the same white fences and rose bushes Sofia had tended like trophies. Her chest tightened as the house came into view, its brick facade a monument to her exile. Laughter spilled from the backyard, champagne glasses clinking over the murmur of old hymns, Sofia's favorites no doubt. Mabel parked a block away, smoothing her black dress, her heels clicking as she stepped out. She carried the manila folder, its weight grounding her, and walked through the gate. No knock, no hesitation. The patio buzzed with relatives she hadn't seen in over a decade, cousins, aunts, uncles, sharing memories she'd been erased from. They looked happy, proud, oblivious to the lie holding their celebration together. A few glanced her way, offering polite, confused smiles, strangers in familiar skin. Then Aunt Julia dropped her glass, the shatter cutting through the chatter like a gunshot. Silence fell, heavy and sudden, all heads turning. Chiara froze mid-laugh, her champagne flute trembling, her eyes locking onto Mabel's like she'd seen a specter. "Is this some sick joke?" she said, her voice loud enough to waver, her perfect mask cracking. Mabel stepped forward, chin high, meeting Chiara's fear with a fire she'd nursed for years. "No joke," she said, her tone steady, cutting. "I'm very much alive." No one spoke, no one moved, the music stopped, or maybe someone killed it. The air thickened with guilt, confusion, a dozen pairs of eyes darting between her and the family she'd once belonged to. Sofia and Matteo stood by the cake table, pale as ghosts themselves. Matteo gripping the edge, Sofia clutching her cross necklace, a reflex when cornered. "You can relax," Mabel said, her voice ringing clear. "I didn't come to ruin your party, just to remind you, you can't bury someone who isn't dead." She opened the folder, holding up the obituary. Her name in bold, a fake death date, a sanitized story of loss. Gasps rippled through the crowd, a prayer whispered in the back. The ghosts they'd mourned stood before them, alive, unyielding, ready to unravel their perfect lie. Mabel stood in the center of the patio, the manila folder open in her hands, the obituary held aloft like a flag of war. The Tacoma sun beat down, glinting off the paper, her name, Mabel Rossi, in stark black ink, a death date that never happened, a paragraph Sofia had penned, lost too soon to a tragic accident. Crowd's gasps grew louder, a ripple of shock turning to murmurs. Sofia's hand tightened on her necklace, her lips parting, but no sound came. Matteo's knuckles whitened on the table, his silence louder than ever. "Someone took the time to write this," Mabel said, her voice steady, slicing through the tension. "To print it, hand it out at church like a grief pamphlet. You buried me in rumor." She flipped to the next pages, photos of her life, holding her first apartment keys, grinning in a graduation cap, cutting the ribbon at Ember Studios opening. "While you wept over a lie, I was building this." She turned to Chiara, whose champagne flute trembled, her face drained of color. "And you," Mabel said, cold and precise, "you sold my things. Took my room apart like I was trash. Wore Grandma's ring, my ring, like it was yours. You didn't just steal my stuff, you stole my story." Chiara's mouth opened, a choked sound escaping, but excuses had no room here. Mabel swept her gaze across the crowd. Uncle Dario shifting uncomfortably, Cousin Lucia whispering to her husband. "All of you stood by," she said. Listened to the lies, repeated them, believed them because it was easier than asking questions. "You let them bury me. But the dead speak now." Patio fractured. Some cried, others stormed off. Aunt Julia shouting about forgiveness while Lucia paced, furious. Voices overlapped, a chaotic symphony of panic and guilt. Mabel stood calm, the eye of the storm, letting the truth burn through their facade. She dropped the folder on the grass, pages scattering. Her diploma, her business license, a passport stamped with years of life they denied. Sofia finally spoke, her voice thin, trembling. "Mabel, you left us. We had no choice." Mateo nodded faintly, a puppet on her string. Mabel laughed, sharp and bitter. "No choice? You chose to kill me off rather than admit you threw me out. That's not grief, that's cowardice." The crowd unraveled further. Some approached her, eyes wet, others glared at Sofia. Mabel didn't flinch. She'd lit the match, and now their perfect lie burned. She'd come to speak, not to stay, and the fire was just beginning. Patio turned into a battlefield of whispers and shouts, the anniversary cake melting in the sun, untouched. Mabel stood amidst the chaos, her black dress a stark contrast to the pastel crowd, the scattered pages of her folder fluttering in the breeze. Sofia stepped forward, her cross necklace glinting, her voice rising. "You abandoned us, Mabel. We had to explain. People asked questions." "Explain?" Mabel shot back, her tone ice cold. "You didn't explain, you lied. Said I died in a crash that never happened. That's not an answer, that's a grave you dug for me." Sofia flinched, her hand dropping from the necklace, her eyes darting to Mateo for support. He stayed mute, head bowed, the same ghost he'd always been. Chiara rushed to Sofia's side, her voice shrill. "You're ruining everything. This was supposed to be their day." She clutched her mother's arm, her nails digging in, but her eyes betrayed her, wide, panicked, a child caught in a lie. Mabel met her gaze, unflinching. "Your day? You built it on my death. How's that feel now?" Cousin Nico, a lanky man with a nervous tic, stormed forward, jabbing a finger at Sofia. "You told us she was gone, dead. I mourned her, damn it." Lucia joined him, tears streaking her face. "Why didn't you tell us she left? We'd have looked for her." Crowds split, some defending Sofia, others turning on her, their voices a tangled roar. Uncle Dario tried to play peacemaker, his booming voice cutting through. "Enough. She's here now, let's talk it out." But Mabel shook her head, her lips curling faintly. "Talk? You had 12 years to talk. You chose candles and slideshows instead." Dario faltered, his hands dropping to his sides. Sofia's mask cracked fully, her voice breaking. "You were trouble, Mabel, always fighting us. We couldn't handle you." Mateo finally spoke, a gravelly whisper. "We thought it was best." Mabel's laugh was a blade. "Best for who? You mourned a lie while I survived your rejection. That's on you." The family crumbled, relatives shouting, some storming off, others staring at Mabel like she'd risen from a coffin. She stood still, letting the chaos swirl, her truth the spark that torched their unity. She'd come to speak it, not to mend it, and now their perfect picture lay in ashes. The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows over the patio as Mabel watched the family she'd once known fracture. Sofia sank into a chair, her face buried in her hands, the cross necklace dangling like a broken promise. Mateo stood beside her, useless, his silence a wall no one could breach. Chiara paced, her heels clicking, muttering, "This can't be happening," as if words could rewind the truth Mabel had unleashed. Nico approached her, his voice low, cracked. "I didn't know, Mabel. I swear, we thought you were gone." Lucia followed, clutching a napkin, her mascara streaked. "I'd have called, looked for you, anything." Mabel nodded, not forgiving, just acknowledging. "You didn't know because they didn't want you to. They needed a tragedy, not a daughter who fought back." Aunt Julia tried again, her voice trembling with forced calm. "Mabel, please forgive them. They're your family." Mabel turned, her eyes steel. "Family doesn't bury you alive. They don't cry over a lie while you're out there breathing. Forgiveness? That's not mine to give, they don't deserve it." Sofia looked up, her eyes red, desperate. "We were ashamed, you left us, defied us. What were we supposed to say? Mabel stepped closer, her voice low, lethal. The truth. She chose herself. But no, you needed a martyr, not a mirror. You killed me to save your pride. Chiara lunged forward, furious. You're selfish. Always were, making everything about you. Mabel smiled, cold and steady. Selfish? I survived you. You wore my ring, lived my erasure. Who's selfish now? Chiara froze, her hands shaking, no reply left. The reckoning spread, relatives picking sides, some hugging Mabel, others cursing Sofia. A child, little Elena, stared up at her wide-eyed, whispering, You're not dead. Mabel knelt, softening for a moment. No, kiddo. I'm right here. Elena's smile was a spark in the wreckage. Mabel stood, the folder's pages crunching underfoot. She'd brought the truth, and it was enough. The family's unity burned, and she was the flame. She turned to leave, her heels steady, the weight lifting with every step. Mabel walked toward the gate, the patio's chaos fading behind her. Shouts, sobs, the clatter of dropped plates. She didn't look back, her black dress catching the evening breeze, her folder left scattered like ashes on the grass. Sofia's voice rose, a last plea. Mabel, wait, we can fix this. But Mabel kept moving, the words hollow, too late. Footsteps followed, soft and hesitant. She turned to see Nico and Lucia, their faces torn between guilt and awe. We're sorry, Nico said, barely above a whisper. We didn't know what they did. Lucia nodded, twisting her napkin. You're so strong, we had no idea. Mabel met their eyes, her voice even. You didn't know because you didn't ask. I don't blame you, but I don't need you either. Little Elena darted out, clinging to Lucia's dress, staring up at Mabel like she was a hero from a tale. You're brave, she said, her small voice cutting through the tension. Mabel smiled faintly, the first warmth she'd felt all day. Thanks, kid. You be brave too. Elena beamed, a quiet promise in her gaze. Mabel reached her car, the black sedan gleaming under the streetlights. She glanced at the house one last time. Sofia slumped, Matteo motionless, Chiara pacing like a caged animal. They'd thought cutting her off was the end, but what they buried had grown, stronger, sharper, alive. She slid into the driver's seat, the engine purring to life, and pulled away, not running this time, but rising. The rearview mirror showed the patio shrinking, the family's perfect lie in ruins. She'd walked in a ghost, walked out a storm, and left them with the wreckage. The road stretched ahead, Tacoma's lights fading, and she exhaled, free, not from them, but from their shadow. 6 months passed, the anniversary of fading echo. Mabel returned to Seattle, her apartment a sanctuary of sketches and coffee stains. Whispers rippled through the family. Some called her cruel, others a hero, but she didn't care. Ember Studio thrived, her inbox flooded with clients drawn to her story, now a quiet legend in design circles. She'd turned their lie into her strength, their erasure into her spotlight. Lena called one night, her voice buzzing with gossip. They're a mess, Mabel. Sofia stopped going to church, too many questions. Teo just sits in the garage. Chiara's engaged, but no one trusts her now. Mabel sipped her wine, unbothered. They built that mess. I just showed it. Social media told the rest. Chiara's posts ignored, Sofia's page silent, Matteo's absence stark. Relatives reached out. Nico sent a long email, Lucia a tearful voicemail, but Mabel let them sit unanswered. She didn't need their guilt or their amends. She'd spoken her truth, and that was closure enough. One evening, she walked her balcony, the city sprawling below, and felt the shift complete. They'd killed her in their narrative, but she'd rewritten it, louder, brighter, hers. She started a podcast, Unburied Voices, pouring her story into the mic. 12 years of silence broken in raw, unfiltered words. Listeners flooded in, strangers, outcasts, others buried by family lies. thanking her for speaking what they couldn't. The aftermath wasn't their ruin, it was her rebirth. She'd shed their ghost, become the storm they'd never seen coming, and she wasn't done rising. A year later, Mabel stood on her balcony at sunrise, the Seattle skyline bathed in gold. Ember Studio had doubled its revenue, her team growing, artists and dreamers she'd lifted from their own shadows. She'd bought a cabin in the Cascades, a retreat of cedar and quiet, her sanctuary from the noise. No family photos hung on her walls, just sketches, awards, a life she'd drawn herself. Chiara's engagement flopped. Her fiancé bailed after the podcast aired, her lies too loud to ignore. Sofia called once, a shaky voicemail Mabel deleted mid-sentence. Teo's silence held, his garage his tomb. The family's legacy crumbled, but Mabel's rose. Clients praised her resilience, her voice a beacon for the discarded. She posted a photo, herself on the balcony, wind in her hair, captioned, "They buried me. I grew." Thousands liked it, but she stepped away, coffee in hand, the city breathing below. She'd crashed their reunion, torched their lie, not for revenge but for herself to claim the story they'd stolen. She smiled, not for them but because she'd never needed their light. Her dawn was hers alone, unshakable, alive.